Before we begin, I ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you these untold stories of the famous. The taste of blood in my mouth wasn't supposed to be real. But there I was, spitting crimson onto the canvas of a hospital bed, machines beeping around me like some twisted soundtrack to my stupidity. 8 days in intensive care, they told me later. 8 days of doctors whispering words like internal bleeding and heart trauma, while my wife held my hand and tried not to cry. All because I couldn't leave well enough alone. All because I had to make it real. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started. 1985, when I thought I was invincible and the Cold War was hotter than a Philadelphia summer. Standing in my Malibu office at dawn, I held the script for Rocky IV like it was the Declaration of Independence. This wasn't just another sequel. This was my middle finger to everyone who said Rocky was done, who whispered that I'd milked the character dry. Reagan was staring down the Soviets. America needed its heroes. And I was going to deliver one hell of a patriotic punch to the gut. You're obsessed, Sly. Bridget's voice cut through my morning ritual of script pages and black coffee. She stood in the doorway in her silk robe, watching me pace like a man possessed. This Russian boxer, you talk about him like he's real. I stopped mid-stride. He will be real. That's the point. What I didn't tell her was that I've been dreaming about Ivan Drago for months. Dreams where this Soviet machine of a man destroyed everything Rocky stood for, where democracy itself hung in the balance of 12 men beating the hell out of each other. Sound dramatic? Maybe. But 1985 was a dramatic year. 3 months later, I met my nightmare in person. Dolph Lundgren walked into that casting room like a glacier that had learned to move. 6'5" of Swedish muscle, with eyes the color of Arctic ice and a handshake that made my knuckles crack. The man had a master's degree in chemical engineering, spoke 5 languages, and looked like he could punch through a brick wall without breaking stride. So you want to be the man who destroys Rocky Balboa, I said, trying to sound casual while my brain screamed warnings about what I was creating. Dolph smiled, if he could call that slight upward curve of his lips a smile. I want to be the man who makes America bleed. Christ. Even his audition gave me chills. That's when I knew I'd found more than an actor. I'd found a weapon. The question was whether I'd be able to control it when the time came. Training became my religion. 4 hours in the gym, 2 hours boxing, another hour of pure punishment just to see how much I could take. Franco Columbu, my trainer and one of the strongest men alive, took one look at my schedule and laughed. You trying to kill yourself before we even start filming? I'm trying to become Rocky again. The real Rocky, not the Hollywood version. Franco stopped laughing. Sly, there's a difference between commitment and suicide. If only I'd listened. But I was high on my own ambition, drunk on the vision of creating something that would make audiences forget they were watching actors pretend to fight. I studied footage of Soviet boxers until my eyes burned, watching these emotionless machines dismantle opponents with scientific precision. No showboat, no personality, just pure, calculated violence wrapped in communist efficiency. That footage haunted me. These weren't just athletes. They were products of a system that turned human beings into weapons. When I watched them fight, I saw everything America feared about the Soviet Union made flesh. Cold, methodical, unstoppable. Perfect for what I needed Ivan Drago to be. The script scene that kept me awake at night was Apollo's death. Killing off Carl Weathers' character wasn't just plot development. It was me ripping the heart out of everyone who'd followed Rocky's journey. But audiences needed to understand the stakes. They needed to hate Drago with every fiber of their being so that when Rocky finally fought back, they'd feel like they were landing punches for freedom itself. Melodramatic? Absolutely. But that's what made it work. My producer Irwin called one morning, voice tight with studio anxiety. Sly, we need to talk budget. These fight scenes you've written, they're brutal. The studio's worried about insurance. Let them worry. If we play it safe, we're making another sports movie. I want to make something that changes people. Just be careful how real you make it, okay? Sometimes reality bites back. He had no idea how prophetic those words were. See, I made a decision that would nearly kill me. I decided that every punch thrown in Rocky IV would look and feel authentic, because I was going to take real punishment. Not movie punches The kind where you hear the slap of skin, missing skin by inches. Real punches. Real pain. Real consequences. I convinced myself it was artistic integrity. Looking back, it was artistic insanity. But standing there in my office that morning, watching the sun paint the Santa Monica Mountains gold, I felt like I was on the verge of creating something legendary. Rocky IV would be my masterpiece, my monument to everything cinema could be when you stop playing it safe. Dolph was training too, turning his already massive frame into something that belonged in a laboratory where they engineered perfect killing machines. When we'd sparred during pre-production, light contact, just choreography, I could feel the power in his hands. Like being hit by a truck that had learned boxing technique. "You sure about this approach, Sly?" he asked me one day after a particularly intense training session. "Making it this realistic, someone could get hurt." I wiped blood from my split lip and grinned. That's what makes it worth watching. The irony wasn't lost on me that a Swedish actor with a chemical engineering degree was the one worried about safety, while the Italian-American kid from Hell's Kitchen was ready to bleed for his art. But that's exactly the kind of reversed expectation that would make Rocky IV special. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that in 3 months' time, I'd be lying in a hospital bed, my heart barely functioning, having learned the difference between movie violence and the real thing in the most painful way possible. The machine was already in motion. The cameras were ordered, the sets built, the costumes fitted. Ivan Drago was about to step out of my imagination and into a boxing ring where the only thing separating fiction from reality would be how hard Dolph Lundgren decided to hit me. And I'd already told him not to hold back. The first day of principal photography felt like stepping into a gladiator arena where the audience was Meow Crew. Stage 15 at MGM had been transformed into a Soviet training facility that looked so authentic it made my skin crawl. Red banners hung from the rafters, portraits of Lenin stared down at us with cold judgment, and the whole place reeked of communist efficiency. I'd spent months creating this world, but standing in it for the first time made my stomach clench with something between pride and terror. Dolph emerged from his trailer that morning looking like he'd been shipped directly from a KGB laboratory. The makeup department had outdone themselves. His already imposing frame now carried the weight of the entire Soviet war machine. When he walked, people stopped talking. When he looked at you, you felt like you were being evaluated for liquidation. "Morning, comrade," I said, trying to break the tension with humor. Dolph didn't smile. He'd been staying in character between takes, something I'd encouraged but was starting to regret. "Good morning, Rocky. Are you ready to die today?" The way he said it, completely deadpan, those Arctic eyes boring into mine, sent ice water through my veins. This wasn't Dolph anymore. This was Ivan Drago, and Ivan Drago didn't make jokes. Our first sparring session was scheduled for 10 a.m. Light contact, the stunt coordinator assured everyone. Just blocking out the choreography, getting a feel for the rhythm. I'd done this hundreds of times on previous Rocky films. It was supposed to be like dancing, violent dancing, but dancing nonetheless. Except nobody had prepared me for what it felt like to be in a ring with a human sledgehammer. The first light jab Dolph threw caught me on the shoulder. I'd been expecting a tap, maybe enough force to make the camera pick up some movement. Instead, I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train that had learned boxing technique. The impact sent shockwaves through my entire torso, and for a split second I forgot where I was. "Too hard?" Dolph asked, finally breaking character for a moment. I rotated my shoulder, trying to shake off the numbness. No, that's good. That's what we need." It wasn't good. It was terrifying. But I was too proud, too committed to the vision to admit that my perfect Ivan Drago might actually be too perfect. The crew watched our next exchange with the kind of fascination usually reserved for car accidents. That Dolph's footwork was flawless, his combinations textbook perfect, and every punch he threw, even at what he considered light contact, would have hospitalized most actors. I started to understand why the Soviets had dominated amateur boxing for decades. This wasn't just about muscle. It was about precision, efficiency, and the kind of cold calculation that turned violence into art. By lunch, I had bruises forming on my ribs, a cut above my left eye that wouldn't stop bleeding, and a growing respect for anyone who'd ever stepped into a professional ring. The makeup department worked overtime covering the damage, but I could see the concern in their eyes. This was day one, and I already looked like I'd been in a street fight. "Sly, maybe we should dial it back a notch," suggested Tommy, our stunt coordinator. He'd worked one very Rocky film, choreographed fights for some of the biggest action stars in Hollywood, and I'd never seen him look worried before. "Dolph's hitting harder than he realizes." I wiped blood from my lip with the back of my hand. "Tommy, if we dial it back, we're making another fake Hollywood fight scene. I want audiences to feel every punch." "They will. Trust me, they will. But if you keep taking shots like that, you won't make it to the end of the week." His words hung in the air, like a prediction nobody wanted to hear. But I was already too far down the rabbit hole of my own ambition to climb back out. Every bruise was proof that we were creating something authentic. Every drop of blood was an investment in cinematic history. That night, I dragged myself home to Malibu feeling like I'd been hit by a Russian tank. Bridget took one look at me, and her face went pale. "Mon Dieu, Sylvester, what happened to you?" I tried to play it off, flashing the cocky grin that had charmed her when we first met. "Just getting into character, baby. You should see the other guy." She wasn't buying it. Her fingers traced the bruises on my arms with the gentle touch of someone who'd seen too much violence in her life already. "This is not acting. This is something else. It's what it takes to make something real." "Real." Her voice rose, that French accent making her anger sound almost musical. "Real is you coming home safe every night. Real is not looking like you've been in a war zone." But that's exactly what I felt like I was in, a war zone where the enemy was my own ambition and the casualties were measured in broken ribs and split lips. I couldn't explain to her that every punch I took was a step closer to creating something that would outlive us both. She wouldn't understand that sometimes art requires blood sacrifice, and I was willing to be both the priest and the offering. The second day was worse. Dolph had spent the night reviewing footage of our first session, analyzing his technique like a chess master studying his next move. When he threw combinations now, there was ascientific precision to the violence that made my bones ache just watching him warm up. "I've been thinking about our approach," he said during a break between setups. "If we're going for realism, I should probably stop pulling my punches so much." The rational part of my brain, the part that still remembered I was making a movie, not training for the Olympics, screamed warnings. But the artist in me, the part that had driven me from a broke actor sleeping in bus stations to writing and starring in a Best Picture winner, was fascinated by the possibility. "What are you thinking?" Dolph's smile was the kind you see on apex predators just before they strike. "I'm thinking Ivan Drago won't hold back, not even in training." Every alarm bell in my head started ringing at once. But standing there in that ring, surrounded by cameras and crew members and the weight of my own expectations, I heard myself say the words that would nearly kill me. "Then don't hold back." The rest of the crew had gone silent. I could feel their eyes on us, could sense the shift in the room from professional filmmaking to something that felt dangerously close to an actual fight. The cameras weren't even rolling, but something had changed. The line between Stallone and Rocky, between Dolph and Drago, had started to blur in ways that made my pulse quicken. Our next sparring session felt different from the moment we touched gloves. Dolph's movements had a predatory quality that hadn't been there before, a sense of barely contained violence that made the air itself feel heavy. When he threw his first real punch, not movie real, but actually real, the sound off leather hitting flesh echoed through the soundstage like a gunshot. I went down, not dramatically, not with the choreographed grace of a movie fall, but like a tree that had been struck by lightning. The taste of blood filled my mouth, my vision blurred, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why I was on the ground. "Sly." Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sly, you okay?" I struggled to my feet, trying to shake off the fog that had settled over my brain. The crew was staring at me with the kind of expression you see at accident scenes, part concern and part morbid fascination. "I'm fine," I managed to say, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Just caught me off guard." But as I stood there, swaying slightly on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wanted more. The punch had hurt like hell, but it had also felt real in a way that nothing else in my career ever had. This was what audiences would see. Not a movie star pretending to be hurt, but a man actually absorbing punishment and finding the strength to continue. Dolph was watching me with those ice blue eyes, and I could see something shift in his expression. Not concern, exactly, but a kind of professional respect mixed with something that looked dangerously Classido predatory anticipation. Again, he asked quietly. The smart answer was no. The safe answer was to call it a day, ice my bruises, and figure out a way to make the fight scenes look real without actually destroying each other. But I'd never been accused of being smart, and safety had never created anything worth remembering. Again, I said, what followed was 15 minutes of the most realistic screen fighting ever captured on film, mainly because it wasn't screen fighting at all. It was two men testing the absolute limits of human endurance in the name of art, with one of them too proud to quit and the other discovering just how much punishment he could inflict without actually committing murder. By the time we called cut, I had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion that wouldn't be properly diagnosed for another week, and the growing certainty that I was losing control of something I'd set in motion. The crew worked around me with the careful efficiency of people who'd realized they were witnessing something that had moved beyond entertainment into the realm of actual violence. But the footage was incredible. Even through the haze of pain and exhaustion, I could see it on the monitors. This wasn't Rocky fighting Ivan Drago anymore. This was primal, visceral, honest in a way that made every other boxing movie ever made look like a children's dance recital. That night, I sat in my bathtub filled with ice water, trying to reduce the swelling in my ribs, while Bridget paced the bathroom like a caged panther. She'd seen the dailies. She knew what I was doing to myself, and she was past the point of gentle concern. This has to stop, Sylvester. Tonight, before you kill yourself for a movie. The ice water felt like needles against my bruised skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold fear in her voice. She was right, of course. Any rational person would have pulled the plug, would have found a way to create the illusion of violence without actually destroying themselves in the process. But rationality had abandoned me somewhere around the 3rd real punch to my solar plexus. I was addicted to the authenticity, drunk on the possibility of creating something that would redefine what cinema could be. Every bruise was a badge of honor. Every moment of pain proof that we were pushing into uncharted territory. Just a few more scenes, I told her, my voice echoing off the bathroom tiles. Once we get the big fight sequence in the can, we can dial it back. She stopped pacing and stared at me with the kind of look that cuts straight through bullshit and find the truth underneath. You're not going to dial it back. You're going to keep pushing until something breaks. And what scares me is that you want something to break. She was right about that too. Part of me, the part that had always been drawn to extremes, that had ridden Rocky while living in a one-room apartment with a pregnant wife and $50 to my name, was curious to see just how far I could push this before my body gave out entirely. What I didn't realize was that I was about to find out. By week 3, I was running on borrowed time and pure stubbornness. My body had become a catalog of injuries that would have sidelined most stuntmen, but I convinced myself that each new bruise was proof we were creating something revolutionary. The mirror in my trailer told a different story. Dark circles under my eyes that makeup couldn't hide, a pallor that made me look like I'd been drained off blood, and a tremor in my hands that I blamed on too much caffeine. The truth was scarier than caffeine jitters. My chest had started feeling tight during the night shoots, like someone was slowly tightening a vice around my ribs. Sometimes I catch myself holding my breath without realizing it, or feeling dizzy when I stood up too quickly. But admitting weakness now would mean admitting that maybe, just maybe, I'd pushed this whole authenticity thing too far. And I wasn't ready to admit that. Not when we were this close to capturing something that would change cinema forever. The footage we were getting was unlike anything ever put on film. Each fight sequence looked and felt real because it was real. Every grunt of pain, every impact, Every moment of exhaustion was genuine. The cameras caught things that no amount of acting could fake. The way my eyes would lose focus for just a split second after a particularly hard hit. The way Dolph's punches would drive the air from my lungs in sharp, involuntary gasps. But the crew had started looking at me like I was a walking accident waiting to happen. During setup for the training montage sequences, I'd catch them whispering in corners, their eyes following me with the kind of concern usually reserved for terminal patients. The insurance representatives had made 3 unscheduled visits to the set, clipboard warriors in cheap suits, asking pointed questions about safety protocols and liability waivers. "Sly, we need to talk." Irwin, my producer, cornered me between takes while the crew reset the lights. His usual Hollywood confidence had been replaced by something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. The studio's getting nervous. Words getting out about what's happening on this set. I was sitting in my director's chair, pressing an ice pack against my ribs and trying not to wince every time I breathed. What word? They were making the most authentic boxing movie ever filmed. The word that you're getting the shit beaten out of you for real, and that somebody's going to end up dead before we wrap. Irwin's voice dropped to a whisper. "There are rumors, Sly. People are saying this isn't filmmaking anymore. It's gladiator combat with cameras." The ice pack wasn't helping. Nothing was helping. My ribs felt like they were grinding against each other with every breath, and there was a persistent ringing in my ears that I'd been ignoring for days. But I forced a grin anyway, the same cocky expression that had gotten me through 1,000 auditions and rejections. Let them talk. When this movie comes out, when audiences see what real fighting looks like on screen, those rumors are going to sound like the best marketing campaign money can't buy. Irwin studied my face with the expression of a man watching someone dig their own grave. "Sly, look 80 yourself. Really look. You're pale, you're shaking, and I watched you almost pass out during that last sequence. How much more can you take?" The honest answer was that I didn't know. My body felt like it was running on fumes, held together by ego and stubbornness. But admitting that would mean admitting that I'd made a mistake, that my vision off authentic filmmaking had crossed the line into self-destruction. And I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. I can take whatever it takes to finish this movie. That night, the conversation I'd been dreading finally happened. Bridget was waiting for me in our bedroom when I got home, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, like she was about to deliver a verdict. The bedside lamp cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look older, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "I spoke to the doctor today," she said without preamble. My blood went cold. "What doctor?" "The one I asked to look at the medical reports from your insurance physical last week. The one who's been watching the dailies and growing more concerned every day." Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "He thinks you might have suffered multiple concussions. He's worried about internal bleeding." I started to protest, but she held up a hand to stop me. "No, Sylvester. No more denials. No more tough guy act. I've watched you for 3 weeks now, and I've seen what this movie is doing to you. You're not sleeping, you're barely eating, and sometimes when you think I'm not looking, I see you holding your chest like you can't breathe." She was right about all of it. The sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart beat irregularly against my bruised ribs. The meals I pretend to eat while my stomach churned with a nausea that had nothing to do with food. The moments of breathlessness that came without warning, leaving Megasping like a fish out of water. "It's just the physical demands of the role," I said, but even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow. Bridget stood up, and for a moment I thought she was going to slap me. Instead, she grabbed my chin and forced me to look directly into her eyes. "Listen to me very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. If you continue down this path, if you keep letting that Swedish monster use you as a punching bag in the name of art, you are going toady. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, actually die. And I will not sit here and watch the man I love kill himself for a movie." The ultimatum hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. She was asking me to choose between the woman I loved and the film that had consumed my life for the past year. It should have been an easy choice. Any rational person would have chosen love, family, survival. But rationality had become a foreign concept. All I could think about was how close we were to finishing, how incredible the footage looked, how this could be the defining moment of my entire career. Rocky V wasn't just a movie anymore. It was my legacy, my proof that I could push cinema in a territory no one else had the balls to explore. "I can't stop now," I whispered. "We're too close." Bridget's expression didn't change, but something died in her eyes. "Then you're choosing that movie over us. Over me. Over your own life." She walked to the bedroom door, paused for a moment with her hand on the frame, and delivered the words that still haunt me. "When this is over, if you survive it, I hope it was worth it." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. The next morning, I showed up to set looking like death warmed over, but determined to prove that I could handle whatever Dolph threw at me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally fighting for my marriage by continuing to fight in a way that was destroying it. Dolph took one look at me and frowned. "You look terrible. I feel fantastic. Let's work." We were filming the sequence where Rocky absorbs punishment from Drago for most of the fight, taking blow after blow while looking for his opening. It was the heart of the movie, the moment where American determination faced Soviet precision, where heart confronted machine. If I could nail this sequence, make it feel real and visceral and desperate, audiences would understand what Rocky represented, what America represented. The first few exchanges went as planned. Dolph's punches were controlled, precise, designed to look devastating while causing manageable damage. But something was different about his technique that day. Maybe it was the weeks of training, maybe it was staying in character for so long, but there was a coldness in his movements that made my skin crawl. "Let's try the combination where you rock me back," I called out between takes. "Really sell it." Dolph nodded, but there was something in his expression that should have been a warning. When you spend weeks teaching someone to hit you, really hit you, eventually they stop pulling their punches without being asked. The combination started normally, a left hook to the body that drove the air from my lungs, followed by an uppercut that snapped my head back. But then came the right cross, the one that was supposed to bait a money shot, the punch that would define Ivan Drago as an unstoppable force. Dolph's fist connected with my jaw like a sledgehammer hitting concrete. The world exploded in white light and ringing silence. I felt my body leave the ground, felt time slow to a crawl as I realized that this wasn't movie violence anymore. This was the real thing, delivered with the full force of a man who'd been trained to destroy opponents, not entertain audiences. I hit the canvas hard, my vision filled with dancing stars and my mouth flooding with the taste of copper. Through the haze, I could hear voices shouting, could sense people running toward the ring, but everything seemed to be happening underwater. "Sly. Jesus Christ, Sly." Tommy's voice cut through the fog, urgent and terrified. I tried to respond, tried to sit up and flash that cocky grin that would let everyone know I was fine, that this was just another day at the office for a tough guy for Philadelphia. But when I tried to speak, only blood came out. The ring was spinning like a carnival ride, and my chest felt like someone had reached inside and was squeezing my heart with a fist made of ice. Each breath was a struggle, each heartbeat irregular and painful. But the cameras were still rolling, and part of me, the part that had driven me to this point, was thrilled that we'd captured something so brutally authentic. "I'm okay," I managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure if the words actually made out of my mouth. "I'm okay," but I wasn't okay. Not even close. And as Dolph leaned over me, his face filled with genuine concern for the first time since filming began, I realized that the line between Rocky Balboa and Sylvester Stallone had finally disappeared completely, which meant that what happened next wasn't going to be acting. The punch that nearly killed me felt like getting hit by a falling satellite. Dolph's right cross connected with surgical precision, his knuckles finding that sweet spot where jaw meets temple with the kind of accuracy that Soviet boxing coaches spend years perfecting. But this wasn't a boxing ring in Moscow, and I wasn't a trained fighter prepared for that level of violence. I was an actor who'd convinced himself that taking real punishment would somehow make his art more authentic. Time fractured. One moment I was standing, the next I was experiencing gravity in a whole new way. The canvas rushed toward my face with shocking speed, and when I hit, The impact sent shockwaves through me skull that made my teeth rattle like dice in a cup. The taste of blood was immediate and overwhelming, filling my mouth with copper warmth that ran down my throat in thick streams. But it was the chest pain that really got my attention, a crushing sensation that felt like someone had reached through my ribs and was slowly closing a fist around my heart. "Medic! Get the fucking medic!" Tommy's voice cut through the ringing in my ears, but it sounded like he was shouting from the bottom of a well. Through the haze, I could see people running toward the ring, their faces twisted with panic. The overhead lights became halos of white fire, too bright to look at directly. I tried to sit up, try to flash that trademark grin that would let everyone know Rocky Balboa could take whatever the world threw at him. But my body wasn't responding to commands anymore. My left arm felt like it belonged to someone else, and each breath was a struggle against invisible weights pressing down on my chest. "Sly, don't move. Just stay down, stay still." The voice belonged to our on-set paramedic, a calm professional who'd probably seen every kind of film set injury imaginable. But his hands were shaking as he checked my pulse, and the way his eyes widened told me everything I needed to know about how bad this was. Dolph's face appeared above me, those ice-blue eyes now filled with something I'd never seen before, genuine terror. The cold, calculating Ivan Drago had vanished, replaced by a Swedish actor who realized might have just killed a Hollywood icon. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his accent thicker than usual. "Jesus Christ, Sly, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hit you that hard." I wanted to tell him it was okay, that this was exactly what we'd been working toward. But when I opened my mouth, only blood came out. Dark, thick blood that pooled on the canvas beneath my head like spilled paint. The world started tilting sideways. Voices became distant echoes. Faces blurred into impressionist paintings. My heart was beating irregularly, skipping beats like a scratched record, and each skip beat sent lightning through my chest. "His pulse is erratic," the paramedic said, his professional calm cracking around the edges. "We need to get him to Cedars immediately." The next few minutes exist in my memory as fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting different moments of crisis. The stretcher being wheeled onto the set, the oxygen mask being placed over my face, forcing chemical-tasting air into lungs that felt like they were full of concrete. The sirens wail as the ambulance screamed through LA traffic, each bump in the road sending fresh waves of agony through my ribs. But clearest of all was Bridget's face as she climbed into the ambulance beside me. The woman who'd threatened to leave me 12 hours earlier was now holding my hand with desperate intensity. Her makeup streaked with tears, she couldn't stop crying. "Stay with me," she whispered in French, then English, then French again. "Don't you dare leave me, you stubborn bastard. Don't you dare." I tried to squeeze her hand, try to communicate that I wasn't going anywhere, that Rocky Balboa didn't quit, and neither did Sylvester Stallone. But my fingers felt like sausages, thick and unresponsive. The edges of my vision were turning black, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the ambulance crew talking in the kind of urgent, clipped phrases that meant someone was dying. BP dropping. Pulse irregular and weak. "How far to Cedars?" 3 minutes. Maybe 2 if we run these lights. "He's going into shock." Get another 4 started. Shock. The word penetrated the fog in my brain like a knife. I'd heard about shock, knew it was the body's way of shutting down when trauma became too much to handle. But this wasn't supposed to be trauma. This was supposed to be acting. The irony would have been funny if I wasn't bleeding to death in the back of an ambulance. The emergency room at Cedars-Sinai was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and people in scrubs moving with the kind of choreographed urgency that comes from years of practice saving lives. They transferred from the ambulance gurney to a hospital bed with practiced efficiency, their hands checking vitals, starting new IVs, hooking me up to machines that began beeping with electronic persistence. What happened? A doctor with kind eyes and steady hands was shining a light in my pupils, checking for signs of brain damage. "Boxing scene gone wrong," someone answered. Took a hard shot to the head and chest. The doctor's expression shifted from professional concern to something darker. How hard? Hard enough to put him down for the count. Hard enough to nearly stop my heart, apparently. The monitors around my bed were painting a picture of a cardiovascular system in crisis, irregular rhythms, and dropping blood pressure that made the medical team exchange worried glances. Give me a chest x-ray and an EKG stat. And call cardiology. I think we might have some internal bleeding here. Internal bleeding. The words hit me like another punch to the gut. All those weeks of taking light shots from Dolph, all those cracked ribs and bruised organs I dismissed as the price of authenticity, had apparently been building toward this moment. My body had been trying to tell me I was dying, and had been too proud to listen. The chest x-ray showed what everyone feared: fluid where there shouldn't be fluid, shadows where there should be clear lung space. The EKG looked like it had been drawn by someone having a seizure, all jagged peaks and irregular valleys that made the cardiologist frown and start speaking in medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language. Cardiac contusion, he explained to Bridget, who hadn't left my bedside since we arrived. The impact damaged the muscle tissue around his heart. Combined with what appears to be internal bleeding in the chest cavity, we're looking at a very serious situation. Bridget's French accent made her question sound even more desperate. Will he live? The pause before the doctor answered told me everything I needed to know. We're going to do everything we can, but the next 24 hours are critical. His body has taken an enormous amount of trauma, and right now, we're just trying to stabilize him enough to assess the full extent of the damage. 24 hours. That's how long I had to find out if my obsession with authentic filmmaking had finally crossed the line from dedication to suicide. The ICU became my world, a sterile bubble of beeping machines and antiseptic smells where time moved differently than it did in the outside world. Nurses came and went like ghosts, checking monitors, adjusting medications, speaking in hushed tones that made me feel like I was already halfway to the morgue. Bridget sat beside my bed in a plastic chair that looked about as comfortable as a medieval torture device, holding my hand and talking to me in a mixture of French and English that sounded like a lullaby designed to keep the dead from crossing over. The doctors say you might have permanent heart damage, she whispered during one of my more lucid moments. They say this kind of trauma can affect you for the rest of your life. The rest of my life. Assuming I had one. I tried to speak, tried to tell her that I understood now, that I'd pushed too far and learned the difference between movie violence and the real thing in the most brutal way possible. But the ventilator tube made speech impossible, so I could only lie there and listen to the steady beep of the heart monitor that was keeping track of my damage ticker. Somewhere in the building, Rocky IV was on hold. Production had shut down the moment my ambulance screamed away from the MGM lot, and now millions of dollars in investment hung in the balance while doctors tried to determine if I'd live long enough to finish what I'd started. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I'd wanted to create the most authentic boxing movie ever made, and I'd succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. The only problem was that the authenticity had nearly killed the star. But lying there in that hospital bed, machines breathing for me and keeping my damaged heart beating, it had to confront a question that cut deeper than any of Dolph's punches. Had it been worth it? The footage we'd shot was incredible, raw and visceral in ways that would redefine what audiences expected from action cinema. But if I died here, if my heart finally gave out under the strain of too much punishment taken in service of too much ambition, would anyone remember the artistry? Or would I just be the actor who died making a movie about fake fighting? The monitors around my bed continued their electronic symphony, each beep a reminder that I was still alive, but not necessarily out of danger. And somewhere in the fog of pain, medication, and regret, I realized that the biggest fight of my life wasn't happening in a boxing ring or on a movie set. It was happening right here in this sterile room between my damaged heart and my refusal to quit. Death, it turns out, is a lousy negotiator. 8 days. That's how long I spend in the ICU, floating between consciousness and whatever lies beyond it, while doctors monitor my damaged heart like astronomers tracking a dying star. 8 days off machines breathing for me, of 4 drips keeping my blood pressure stable, of nurses checking my vitals every hour, as if my body was a crime scene they were still investigating. When I finally opened my eyes and stayed awake long enough to focus, the first thing I saw was Bridget's face. She looked like she'd aged a decade in just over a week. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, and a fragility I'd never seen before. She was holding my hand, but her grip felt different somehow, protective but distant. "Welcome back," she whispered, and I could hear an ocean of relief mixed with something that sounded dangerously close to resentment. The doctor who'd saved my life was a soft-spoken cardiologist named Dr. Marcus Chun, and he delivered news that would change everything about how I understood my own mortality. "You suffered what we call a cardiac contusion," he explained, his voice gentle but clinical. "The impact damaged the muscle tissue around your heart. You also had significant internal bleeding in your chest cavity. Mr. Stallone, I want you to understand, you came very close to dying. Minutes close. Minutes." The word hung in the sterile air like a death sentence that had been commuted at the last possible moment. "Will there be permanent damage?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Dr. Chin's pause told me everything. "Your heart will heal, but it may never be quite the same. You'll need to be careful with physical exertion for the rest of your life. No more boxing, real or otherwise. Your body has limits now that it didn't have before." Limits. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I'd spent my entire career pushing past limits, refusing to accept boundaries that other people took for granted. Now a doctor was telling me that my obsession with authenticity had permanently redefined what my body could handle. Recovery was a humbling lesson in what real strength actually meant. The man who'd convinced himself could take punches from a professional-level athlete now struggled to walk to the bathroom without getting winded. Simple tasks like climbing stairs left me breathless. My damaged heart working over to pump blood through a system that had been traumatized beyond repair. Physical therapy became my new gym, replacing the brutal training sessions with careful, measured movements designed to rebuild what I'd broken. My therapist was a patient woman named Sarah who treated me like any other patient recovering from severe trauma, not like a movie star who'd brought his injuries on himself. "The heart is a muscle," she explained during one of our sessions. "But it's also the only muscle that never gets to rest. When you damage it, the effects ripple through everything else your body does." 3 weeks after I nearly died, I returned to the Rocky IV set for the first time. The crew greeted me with a mixture of relief and awkwardness, like I was a ghost who'd returned to finish unfinished business. Some of them looked at me with genuine concern, others with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for car accident survivors. Dolph was waiting for me in my trailer, and the moment I saw him, I knew he'd been carrying the weight off what happened like a stone in his chest. The confident Ivan Drago persona had been replaced by Amon, who looked haunted by the knowledge that he'd nearly killed someone with his bare hands. "Sly Eye," he started, then stopped, searching for words in English that could somehow make sense of the senseless. "It wasn't your fault," I told him, and I meant it. "I asked you to hit me. I insisted on it. You were just doing what I wanted you to do." But we both knew that explanation didn't make either of us feel any better about what had happened. The first time I watched the dailies from our fight sequences, I understood why I'd nearly died for them. The footage was unlike anything ever captured on film. Raw, visceral, authentic in ways that made every other boxing movie look like choreographed theater. You could see the real impact in every frame, the genuine pain in my eyes, the actual exhaustion in my movements. It was everything I dreamed of creating, and it had almost killed me. "Jesus Christ, Sly," Irwin whispered as we watched the sequence where Dolph's punch had nearly ended me life. "This is incredible and terrifying." He was right on both counts. The footage was incredible. It would go on to redefine what audiences expected from action cinema. But it was also a document of a man pushing himself beyond human limits in service of an artistic vision that had consumed his sense of self-preservation. Finishing the film required a completely different approach. We used body doubles for the most dangerous sequences, employed camera tricks, and careful editing to create the illusion of violence without the reality of it. It felt like cheating after everything we'd been through, but it also felt like survival. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent weeks insisting on authentic violence, only to complete the movie using the same Hollywood magic I'd been trying to avoid. But the real challenge wasn't finishing Rocky IV. It was rebuilding my marriage. Bridget had stayed with me through the worst of it, but something fundamental had changed between us. She'd watched the man she loved nearly die for a movie, and that kind of trauma leaves scars that didn't show up on x-rays. I keep thinking about that night, she told me one evening as we sat on our deck watching the sun set over the Pacific. The night I told you to choose between the movie and your life. You chose the movie, Sylvester, and you almost died for it. I wanted to tell her that I'd learned my lesson, that I understood now what really mattered. But we both knew that the choice I'd made revealed something about my character that couldn't be undone by near-death experiences or heartfelt apologies. Would you do it again? She asked quietly. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you still tell Dolph not to hold back? The honest answer scared both of us. Part of me, the part that had driven me from a broke actor tow-riding and starring in a Best Picture winner, would probably make the same choice again. The footage it captured was that good, that groundbreaking, that worth preserving for cinematic history. But another part of me, the part that had felt my heart struggling to beat in that ICU, knew that some prices are too high to pay, even for art. Rocky IV became a global phenomenon, grossing over $300 million worldwide and cementing the franchise as a cultural touchstone. Audiences responded to the authenticity of the fight sequences with an enthusiasm that proved my instincts about realism had been correct. Critics called it the most visceral boxing movie ever made, praising the raw intensity of the performances. What they didn't know was that the intensity came from actual violence, that the star of the film had nearly died creating the very scenes they were celebrating. For years, I kept that secret. The official story was that I'd suffered a minor injury during filming, nothing serious enough to warrant concern. The truth, that I'd spent 8 days in intensive care with a damaged heart and internal bleeding, remained known only to a small circle of people who'd signed non-disclosure agreements. But secrets have a way of eating at you from the inside, especially when they involve moments that redefined your understanding of mortality. Now, decades later, I can look back at that period with something approaching wisdom. Rocky IV stands as one of the most successful films in the franchise, a Cold War epic that captured a moment in American history when heroes felt both necessary and possible. The fight sequences remain unmatched in their brutal authenticity, a testament to what cinema can achieve when filmmakers are willing to push beyond conventional boundaries. But I also carry the knowledge that I came within minutes of dying for that authenticity. My heart still bears the scars of Dolph's punches, reminding me daily that the line between dedication and self-destruction is thinner than most people imagine. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and Bridget is asleep beside me, I replay that moment when Dolph's fist connected with my jaw. I think about the choice I made to prioritize art over safety, and you wonder what kind of man values a movie more than his own life. The answer, I come to understand, is the same kind of man who writes himself into a story about an underdog boxer from Philadelphia, who refuses to accept that dreams have limits, who believes that sometimes the only way to create something meaningful is to risk everything in the process. Was it worth it? That's the question that haunts me, the one I've never been able to answer with complete certainty. Rocky IV changed cinema, proved that audiences hunger for authenticity even when it comes at a terrible cost. But it also changed me, left me with a damaged heart and the knowledge that my obsession with pushing boundaries had nearly destroyed everything I claimed to care about. I suppose that's the price of making art that matters. Sometimes you have to bleed for it, literally. Sometimes you have to risk everything to create something that will outlive you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you survive to tell the story of what that sacrifice actually cost. The scar tissue around my heart serves as a permanent reminder that there's a difference between being tough and being smart, between dedication and obsession, between making great art and making art that nearly kills you. But when I watch Rocky IV today, when I see those fight sequences that cost me so much to create, I can't bring myself to regret the choice entirely. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the art really is worth the blood. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.